The low hum of the highway filled the cabin of Maya Thompson's car as she adjusted her rear-view mirror. The day had been long, but she felt accomplished. As an attorney specializing in civil rights cases, she was no stranger to grueling hours at the firm. Tonight, though, her thoughts weren't on work. They were on her daughter, Layla, waiting at home, likely bouncing in anticipation of the pizza night Ava had promised. The golden hues of the sunset cast long shadows over the road as she approached her neighborhood in Dallas, Texas. She sighed, relieved to be just minutes away from home. That relief was short-lived. Flashing red and blue lights appeared in her mirror. Her stomach clenched. She wasn't speeding. She hadn't run a red light. There was no reason to be pulled over. Ava kept her movements deliberate as she turned on her hazard lights and slowly pulled onto the shoulder. She had been through this before. Too many times. Her fingers trembled slightly as she rolled down the window, keeping her hands visible on the steering wheel. It was an unspoken rule, one she had learned early. The officer approached her car with slow, deliberate steps. A bright flashlight shone directly into her face, momentarily blinding her. She squinted but kept her expression neutral. "License and registration," he said flatly. Ava recognized the tone immediately. There was no professionalism, no courtesy, only an edge of hostility. She nodded, carefully reaching for her purse with one hand and the glove compartment with the other. "Here you go, officer." Her voice was even, respectful. The cop barely acknowledged her, snatching the documents from her hand before retreating to his cruiser. Ava exhaled, gripping the wheel tighter. She watched through her side mirror as he sat in his car, lingering longer than necessary. Minutes passed. Then he returned. But something had shifted. His posture was tense, his expression hard. He waved her ID in the air as if it were evidence in a trial. "This doesn't look right," he said, his tone dripping with accusation. "Are you sure this is yours?" Ava's brows knitted together. "Yes, officer. It's mine. If there's an issue, you can check it in your system." His smirk made her stomach turn. "Oh, we'll see about that." He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "What's someone like you doing in this area?" Ava's pulse spiked. "Someone like you." She kept her voice measured. "Officer, I'm on my way home. I haven't broken any laws." The officer stepped back, gripping her ID tightly. He hesitated, then scoffed. "Wait here." Ava watched as he returned to his cruiser, her mind racing. This wasn't about a traffic violation. It never was. Her heart pounded, but she knew better than to let fear take over. When he returned, her stomach dropped. His expression was smug. And in his hand, alongside her ID, was a lighter. Ava's breath caught. "This looks fake," he said, rolling the lighter between his fingers. "Officer, that's my—" Before she could finish, he flicked the lighter open. The small flame wavered dangerously close to her ID. Ava's body tensed. "Wait. You can't." But it was too late. The flame caught the edge of the card, curling the plastic as it blackened and warped. The acrid smell filled the air as he let it drop onto the pavement, stepping on the smoldering remains with his boot. Ava stared, her breath caught in her throat. Her voice came out in a whisper, shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "Why would you do that?" The officer smirked. "Next time, bring something real." Without another word, he turned and walked back to his cruiser. Moments later, his car roared to life, speeding off into the night. Ava's hands trembled on the steering wheel as she stared at the burnt remains of her ID. The initial shock wore off, replaced by something else. Resolve. She picked up her phone, her fingers fumbling slightly as she pulled up the dash cam app she had installed years ago. The red light blinked in confirmation. It had been recording the entire time. His words, his actions, his arrogance, everything. Ava tapped the screen, replaying the footage. Her jaw tightened as she heard his mocking tone, saw the smirk on his face. This wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had been humiliated, intimidated, and dehumanized by someone who was supposed to uphold the law. Her grip on the phone tightened. She wasn't going to let this slide. Ava sat in her car, her breathing shallow but controlled. She couldn't let emotions take over. Not now. With a deep inhale, She dialed the first number that came to mind. "Jordan," she said when he picked up, "I need you." Jordan Carter was more than just a fellow attorney. He was her closest ally in civil rights law. "What happened?" His voice sharpened immediately. Ava recounted the incident in crisp, detailed sentences, keeping her tone steady. "Tell me you got on video." Jordan said, "I did." A pause. Then a clip but certain. "Good. We're going after him. BY the next morning. Jordan had filed a formal complaint with Internal Affairs, attaching the dashcam footage as evidence. He made it clear they weren't just looking for disciplinary action. They were pressing charges. The video spread like wildfire. Local news stations picked up the footage, and within hours, it went viral on social media. The officer, now identified as Sergeant Richard Coleman, was no stranger to misconduct. Complaints had been filed against him before, but they had always been quietly buried. This time was different. This time, the world was watching. Protests erupted outside the police station, chants of justice for Ava echoing through the city. Community leaders, activists, and even other law enforcement officers denounced his actions. Ava, ever composed, stood before the gathered crowd during a rally. The microphone was cold in her hand, but her voice was warm and unwavering. "This isn't just about me," she told them. "This is about accountability, about the abuse of power, and about ensuring that no one else suffers this kind of humiliation." Applause and cheers rippled to the crowd, but Ava knew this was only the beginning. The legal battle was just starting. The hearing was packed. Journalists lined the back of the courtroom. Spectators whispered among themselves. All eyes on Ava as she took the witness stand. Across from her, Sergeant Richard Coleman sat stiffly, his expression unreadable. The prosecutor began by playing the dashcam footage on a large screen. The courtroom fell silent as Coleman's mocking words filled the air. "Maybe this will teach you a lesson." The flick of the lighter, the ID curling into blackened ash. Gasps rippled through the room. Ava remained poised, her chin high, as the prosecutor asked her to recount the events. She told her story methodically, leaving no detail unspoken. When it was the defense attorney's turn, he attempted to spin the situation. "Miss Thompson, isn't it possible the officer simply misjudged the validity of your ID?" Ava met his gaze evenly. "If he thought my ID was fake, he had legal means to verify it. Instead, he chose to destroy my property and humiliate me." The attorney tried again. "Isn't it true that tensions during traffic stops can be high? Perhaps you misinterpreted his actions." Ava's lips pressed into a firm line. "I'm an attorney. I know the law, and I know the difference between an officer doing his job and an officer abusing his power." The courtroom murmured in agreement. Then, the prosecutor delivered the final blow. They pulled up Coleman's internal record. A history of complaints, excessive force, racial profiling, a pattern of unchecked behavior. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours. Their verdict: guilty of misconduct, destruction of private property, and abuse of authority. Coleman was officially dismissed from the force. But for Ava, this wasn't just about getting one bad cop off the streets. This was about something bigger. Ava used a settlement she received to start the Justice Fund, an organization dedicated to providing legal support for victims of racial profiling and police misconduct. Her case had sparked a movement. New policies were introduced in the police department, including mandatory body cams and bias training. More importantly, other officers who had long remained silent finally began speaking out against misconduct within their ranks. Months later, Ava found herself on national news, sitting across from a well-known anchor. "What message do you have for those watching?" the interviewer asked. Ava folded her hands together, her voice steady as she spoke. "Accountability isn't just about punishment. It's about changing a system that allows bad actors to thrive. It's about rebuilding trust. And it's about making sure no one else experiences what I did." The interview went viral. She was invited to speak at civil rights panels, universities, and police reform discussions. Her voice became more than just her own. It became a call to action. One evening, months after the trial, Ava drove down that same stretch of road. This time, she wasn't alone. Her daughter, Layla, sat in the back seat, humming along to a song on the radio. As they passed the intersection where it all happened, Ava glanced at it briefly. The memory was still there, but now so was the victory. She had taken that moment of humiliation and turned it into something greater. And that thought gave her peace. Ava's story isn't just one woman's fight for justice. It's a reminder that silence allows injustice to thrive. But one voice, backed by determination, can create waves of change. If her story moved you, take a moment to think about how you can make a difference. Support organizations fighting for justice. Hold those in power accountable. Educate yourself and those around you. Every action matters. Because change doesn't start with someone else. It starts with you.